Are you the first to do something in your family? Like the first to graduate from college or to own a home? Or are you the first person to be considered well off or rich? It is said that 90% of families that acquire wealth lose it by the third generation. You see, the thing about money is that many can make it, but only a few know how to keep it. So not only will it be hard to acquire generational wealth, but then to keep it and not fall in that 90% will be a stretch. The risk is that you are gonna spend most of your life making a fortune and the next generation just comes and blows it completely without a second thought. And this is why today we're gonna talk about such an important subject matter. Welcome back to my channel, my YouTube family. My name is Odetta, and it's great to have you back. Today, we're gonna talk about the 12 steps to creating and maintaining generational wealth. If you're not yet a part of this amazing family of rock stars over here, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and like the video. If you don't like it at the end, you can always go back and unlike it. But we don't want to leave that like to memory, so let's get it out of the way from early. Thank you in advance. The first step to creating generational wealth is to teach your children about money management. It is often said that the more we learn is the more we earn. This is no different. The same principles apply. There's a section in my book, No Regrets, Just Lessons, that speaks to lessons, I think it's 10 lessons that you should teach your children about money or money-related topics. You should read that as parents, as grandparents, as aunties, uncles, mothers and fathers. Well, mothers and fathers are parents, but make sure you share it with your children and do so at a very early age. Now, money management knowledge is important so that your hard work will not go in vain. Because can you imagine you sacrificing your life to create wealth and the next generation comes and splurges it on sports cars, which we're seeing a lot of that today? You can't afford for that to happen. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make them a part of whatever business that you have. And you need to do so early. You need to assume the role as coach, mentor, and teacher for your children on this path to financial literacy and money management, because as I'm sure you know, financial literacy is not something that's taught in any school system, as far as I know at least. So you have to become that for your children in order to preserve wealth. Now, the reality is that by the time you die, your children will already be adults and you would have imparted that knowledge on them. What you need to insist on happening is that they do the same for their children, because usually it's the grandkids that splurge and kill all of your hard work. So ensure that that continuity of knowledge, mentorship, and everything related to money management is being passed on from your children to your grandchildren. If they're not doing a good job of it, don't be afraid to take control of the situation and become mentors and teachers for your grandkids as well. Now, you have heard me talk about the power of compound interest many times on this channel, and that's actually step 2 to creating or generating wealth and to keeping it. You need to teach your children the power of starting early, leveraging compound interest, and using it to create wealth. Remember, children don't do what we say, they do what we do. So you can start an investment, start it from very early, and show them the power of compound interest, and then it becomes more believable because you're no longer telling them how this works. Now, let me give you a practical example as to how I'm using compound interest to create generational wealth. In my 20s, I decided to start the first investment for my son. I wanted it to be affordable and something that I could sustain regardless of what was happening around me. So I started with $100 per month. And I figured I would pay it until I get to my 70s, assuming I live that long, God's will. So by investing $100 in a low risk fund for my son until I'm age 70, it means that I would be able to leave him with $778,000 from $100. All I would have contributed out of pocket would be $60,000, and the rest of it that makes up to that $778,000 is all compound interest over time. Now, as I started to do better in my career, I decided to increase the amount that I was investing for my son per month. Let's say hypothetically, I increased it to $1,000 per month instead of $100. So instead of $778,000 when I invest $100, by investing $1,000 per month with the same conditions and for the same period, that would be $7.8 million that I would have accumulated. And here's the beauty of it. With the power of compound interest, I would only have contributed $601,000. The remaining 7-point-odd million would come from compound interest over time. You see how powerful it is? Now let's say my son decides to take that $7.8 million, invest it in a medium risk mutual fund. He can live off the interest, which would be $52,000 per month. Now with that, he can not only live a great life, he can also invest 50% of that, and he can pass that on to his children so that that principal will never be touched, because they're able to live off the interest from generation to generation. Now you're probably thinking,
and I'm already in my 40s, Odetta. How can I leverage this?
Listen, you can still leverage this. If you're in your 40s, you can target $500 because you'll need a greater sacrifice. So you can target $500 per month. Because many of us are living to our 70s, let's assume you paid for 20 years until you get to your 70s. You would be leaving your children $1 million. And if they take that $1 million and invest it in a mutual fund, they will be getting $6,600 per month, which again, they can live off. Of course, it depends on where they live, but in most territories across the globe, $6,600 per month can provide a comfortable life. Now, the third step to creating generational wealth and keeping it may be a little bit, I'd say, you might judge me for it, but you know, guys, I'm used to judgment. It's to marry well or to teach your children about prenups. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Odetta, you are preparing our children to be gold diggers.
No, I'm not. I'm preserving your wealth and your hard-earned money. So let's not make this personal. The thing about marrying is if your child decides to marry someone who does not do well financially, they need a prenup. Because as I'm sure you know, whether we want to believe it or not, there are a lot of gold diggers out there, both males and females, and they will marry for money and leave your child, whether male or female, penniless. So let's not pretend that it's not a reality, because by doing so, you compromise your wealth. Let's face it head on. We're not saying our children will have to marry well, but we're saying that if they marry someone, you need to use a prenup, whether that person is doing well or not. Make it a part of the education that you leave them with. You would realize that Bill Gates' divorce settlement actually took him a few notches down from being one of the wealthiest men in the world. And it was no different for Jeff Bezos. Now, the fourth step to creating generational wealth is to use people's money to make money. It's a simple principle, guys. If you need money to invest in something, do not go selling off your assets, or do not go taking your money that you have saved or invested. Go to the bank, get a loan, and use that to take all the chances in the world. So to give you a practical example, If you own a piece of land, for example, instead of selling the land and taking that money to go and invest it in whatever business or venture that you're planning, you can just go to the bank, use the equity in the land, borrow against it, and use the money that you borrow to finance whatever it is that you're doing. This is exactly how you build wealth. The good thing about borrowing as well is when you make good on your loan and pay it off in time, you'll find that they'll allow you to borrow more and you can take on bigger projects, and the cycle continues to you creating and keeping wealth. Now, the fifth step to creating generational wealth is something that I've practiced from the moment my son turned 18. And that's to acquire assets, not just in your name, but yours and your child's name. And this one is critical. As I'm sure you know, transfer and inheritance taxes are extremely high, regardless of where you live across the globe. And this is because the government wants to make money when your assets change hands. By putting my son, for example, on a land title or on a property title, that changing of hands doesn't need to happen, because whenever something happens to me, it automatically goes to him. Now, just to give you some perspective on the taxes that government is charging, transfer taxes in Jamaica is 2%, and in the US, it can be as much as 2.65%. Now, there is also inheritance tax, and this one is extreme because in the UK, it's 40% of the value of the property that you're transferring to the next generation. In the US, it's anywhere from 17% to 40%. You want to avoid taxing your hard-earned money or the assets that you have worked so hard to accumulate just to pass it on to your next generation. Now, the sixth step to creating generational wealth is to invest in the newest innovation out there. Now, let me take you back in history a little bit to bring across this point. In the 1960s, ATM machines and GPS technology was invented. In the 1970s, the personal computer was, I wouldn't say it was invented, but it was brought to some amount of perfection, and also digital music, the kind that you stream today, was created. In the 1990s, the World Wide Web, the internet, was invented, and in the 2000s, it was cell phones, and in 2010, it was social media. Now, let me ask you a question. Did you get any opportunity to invest in any one of those life-changing innovations? I'm gonna answer for you. I'm thinking the answer is no, because if it was yes, you wouldn't be sitting here watching Odetta on YouTube. You would be teaching Odetta from what you have acquired and accumulated based on your investment. Would you agree? I'm gonna answer for you again and say yes.